finding your best fit Myers-Briggs type is not straightforward for everyone, and it can be especially tricky for INTPs. The most common mistypes for an INTP include INTJ, INFP, and INFJ, and sometimes even ENTP. So today I want to share a few things that can skew your results and some ways to break the deadlock. Hi, I'm Samantha MacKay, lead trainer at Truity, and deciding on our type isn't always easy. And despite testing as an ENTP for years, I never really connected with it, never really believed it, until I finally tested as an INTP. And after diving into it, I realized it just wasn't me. So the first thing to consider when mistyping is about being under a lot of stress or pressure. Being under a lot of stress can dramatically alter how we behave and how we make decisions. For an INTP, it can manifest in a few different ways, and if you take a personality test while in that state, you might type a little differently. So, for example, if you're the kind of INTP who lashes out and wallows in floods of emotion when stressed, well, you might mistype as an INFP. If you become more rigid and stubborn, you might type as an INTJ. Or if you do both, you might type as an INFJ. You can see how that might play out there. The next thing to consider is cultural expectations. So, female INTPs are often expected to develop their caring and people-oriented side from quite a young age, to be more gentle, patient and tolerant. And male INTPs can often get the message that they need to be more extroverted and assertive to fit in with their peer groups, both of which can lead to an identity crisis in adolescence or in later years to try and reckon with who they really are. And while exhausting, INTPs are very good at playing the chameleon and adapting to these social and cultural expectations. So if you take the test under these conditions, you might type more like the type you are playing rather than the type you really are. So finally, it can be really helpful to consider other aspects of the Myers-Briggs model. So if you type in the middle of one of the dichotomy pairs, such as judging and perceiving or thinking and feeling, it can be very helpful to look at the model from a different perspective, such as the temperaments, the sandwich model, or cognitive functions. So let's use the cognitive functions for an example of how you might look at this from different perspectives and break the deadlock. So there are 8 cognitive functions or ways of thinking, and of the 8, you prefer one over all the others, and this is known as your dominant function. And you feel more at home using this way of thinking than the others. So INTPs, INFPs, and INFJs all have different preferred ways of thinking or different dominant functions. So an INTP's dominant function is known as introverted thinking, and it focuses on evaluating data based on their own criteria. So they prefer to ask questions like, how does this make sense to me? While INTJs lead with something known as introverted intuition, which focuses on connecting the dots about what will happen in the future. So they ask themselves questions like, how will the future be affected by this? And finally, INFPs lead with introverted feeling, and that focuses on evaluating experiences based around their personal feelings and values. So they spend a lot more time pondering questions like, how does this fit with my values? So an INTP's mistyping themselves could range from a number of factors, be it biological, psychological, or cultural. But when it boils down to it, INTPs seek clarity of thought above all. And it may take a few months or years to figure out your best fit type, as self-awareness is a continuous process. But the upsides of personal discovery for an INTP are limitless, as it opens the doors to fulfillment in relationships, careers, and growth. To learn more about the models I've mentioned today, or about INTPs in general, head over to truity.com.